Hi, this is Dan Grolowski. We're continuing our way working through Chapter 7. We want to take a deeper dive here when we consider price floors, and we want to look at the mechanics of the producer and consumer surplus. And before we get to the minimum wage, we want to look at what happens with a generic statement of price floors. That's me down in the corner. I may not appear in video on other slides, but I wanted to let you know that we are here working and we are helping to build a learning platform for you here in the spring of 2020. So we're going to talk about price floors. What are price floors? Price floors are when the government says there is a price below which no transactions will occur. So it's a legal price that takes place, and for it to make sense, it has to be above the equilibrium. So moving on from the introduction to the material about the price floors, we are going to go in a deep dive here and look at changes in consumer and producer surplus. It would probably be a good idea if you wanted to print this slideshow first, or at least the graphs from this slideshow, and follow along. If you're a very visual learner, that's probably not necessary. If you like to learn by doing, then printing them up may be a good idea. We want to think about first what happens when a market is in equilibrium. So when a market is in equilibrium, as this market is, we see that 1,000 units are exchanged and the market price is equal to $4.61. So the market will find itself right here at point A. And point A is an equilibrium, as we well know. It's an efficient equilibrium because the marginal benefit equals to the marginal cost. And in other words, on the margin, buyers are willing to pay $4.61 for the good. In fact, for the 1,000th unit of the good. And producers are willing to supply that 1,000th unit of the good for $4.61. It's also true that buyers are willing to pay more and producers are willing to supply for less than that equilibrium price. You know, some of these buyers have a gap between the price line and the demand function. That gap here represents consumer surplus. In other words, a buyer is willing to pay that much, they have to pay that much, so that gap is consumer surplus for that individual unit. Across all units, that consumer surplus is shown at the area WCA. Likewise, producers. Some producer is willing to supply that unit for that amount. They don't have to. They supply it for $4.61. And that's true of all units supplied. So the producer surplus here is the triangle CGA. So keep in mind that we have producer and consumer surplus, and they're given by the areas of those indicated triangles. Oh, what happens when a price floor is put in place? The price floor put in place because the government comes to the conclusion that $4.61 is too low of a price. So the government passes a law that says the price in this market will be $5. We know what's going to happen at the price of $5. There's going to be an excess supply. The quantity supplied is bigger than the quantity demanded. And we will have to see what other implications there are in the marketplace. So getting to those implications, here we have a price floor put in place at $5 per unit. Where does the market go? The market goes to point M. What's special about point M? Well, it is the market outcome. Instead of 1,000 units being sold for a price of $4.61, we see 900 units sold at a price of $5. So we would say the market moves from point F to point M. The price of the good rises. And we can see here that at the price of $5, more is supplied than is demanded. In fact, the quantity supplied at that price is 1,200, and the quantity supplied is 900, meaning that suppliers are willing to bring forth another 300 units at that price of 5, but they have no incentive to do so. They have no incentive to do so because of the price floor that's put in place. That is a deviation caused by the price floor. What else happens here? Well, if we look at point M a little more closely, we come to the conclusion, we see that some of the consumer surplus has disappeared. How do we know it's disappeared? Well, the consumer surplus was the yellow triangle, WTF. It is now that smaller triangle, WZM. That consumer surplus, right? It's the difference between the demand function and the price line. Now, we can also see that while it's disappeared, it still exists. The area is still there. In other words, the entire area of the yellow triangle isn't there, but most of it's there. But the consumer surplus is now WZM. And we have to think, well, what happened to the rest of that area? What happened to that area in here? Where did it go? Well, the consumer surplus is much smaller. If we look at that area is rectangle ZTRM. That used to be part of consumer surplus. It no longer is. In fact, that area has gone to become producer surplus. We'll see that shortly, but for now, we conclude that the consumer surplus is the triangle WZM. It's a lot smaller, isn't it? Now, the producer surplus. What is the producer surplus? It is the area above the supply function and below the price line. So it used to be the triangle PGF. What is it now? Well, it doesn't go across the whole way of that area. It seems to have changed. And it changed in two ways. First off, it lost the right-hand side triangle of consumer surplus. This area right in here is no longer part of producer surplus. However, they've gained something, right? They have gained the rectangle ZTM. This area used to belong to consumers. Now it belongs to producers. The rest of the producer surplus, right, it's the entire area below the price line and above the supply function. It has that shape, sort of like an upside down chimney shape. And that is now the producer surplus area. Again, it has a different shape. That corner of the triangle from producer surplus is missing, but we added a rectangle. The boundaries of this shape are the point Z, G, H, and M. That's G, Z, H, and M. We're about ready to begin summing up our changes in consumer and producer surplus because of the imposition of the price floor. The idea is that the market goes from point F to point M. The price rises, right, in the market, and less is consumed. So we have both a price rise and less being consumed. At the price floor, there's an excess supply. But what can be said about consumer and producer surplus? Well, consumer surplus experienced a loss. The loss in consumer surplus is two components. This little triangle, MNF, right here, that triangle right there, they lost. That's gone. The other thing that consumers lost was consumers lost this rectangle right here. They lost the rectangle ZTNM. However, the ZTNM is not completely gone. It's transferred. It now becomes part of producer surplus. right? What is producer surplus? Producer surplus is that rectangle, ZTNM, plus this upside down chimney shape, TGCN. So are consumers better off or worse off? We're not really we know consumers are worse off. Are producers better or worse off? Well, producers had a loss and a gain. Again, the consumer surplus after the price floor is the rectangle ZTNM plus the chimney-shaped region TGCN. Again, we see our loss of consumer and producer surplus. What's interesting to note here is that the price floor, if we think about it in layman's terms, the price floor would be put in place to help suppliers of a good or service, basically to raise their price. Now, we know for sure that producers lose. That's kind of intuitive. They're paying a higher price and they're buying fewer units. That's going to be a loss. The part is, do producers gain or do producers lose? Because producers have a little bit of each here. Producers gain in the sense that they gain this rectangle right here. So what's interesting to note about this price floor idea is that if we think about, does a price floor help or hurt consumers, and does a price floor help or hurt producers, we could expect it to hurt consumers. And it would hurt consumers because the price rose, and it would hurt consumers also because there's less units exchanged. So consumers see higher prices and they see a smaller amount exchanged. Basically, you are pushing consumers up their demand curve from a lower price to a higher price, and that's generally harmful to consumers. We saw that unambiguously the consumer surplus, because of the price floor, fell. Producers, it's another story. They could be better off or they could be worse off. How could producers be better off or worse off? Well, we have to think about the two impacts on producer behavior. Producers are going to lose an area of producer surplus. They're going to lose the area of producer surplus that is that little triangle NCF. They're going to gain an area of producer surplus that is this rectangle, which is basically transferred from consumers to producers. Do producers gain or do they lose? That remains to be seen. However, we do know that there is a complete and total loss of welfare, and that loss in welfare is the triangle MCF. What is the triangle MCF? Well, the triangle MCF is the deadweight loss because of the price floor. Triangle MCF is the loss in both producer and consumer surplus because of the imposition of the price floor. So when we think about the overall implications of imposing a price floor, we have to think about potentially producers are better off, but consumers definitely lose.